Hello, my name is Tim Hearn from Woking Hypnosis, and today I'd like to share another technique with you that you can use at home on your own to help to alleviate those uncomfortable feelings of stress and anxiety. It isn't hypnosis, but it's a technique that's called emotional freedom technique, often shortened to EFT, and otherwise known simply as tapping. And the reason for that is that the essence of the process is to simply hold in mind, to think about that negative situation that's causing you to feel uncomfortable and stressed or anxious. And whilst doing that, you then proceed to tap certain parts of the upper body with your fingers to create this soothing effect. The points of the body that you tap are referred to as acupoints or acupressure points. Now, the reason this process or technique is as effective as it is yet to be really discovered. But a lot of research is being done. There's been a good number now of empirical studies, and the evidence is growing that this is a pretty effective way of bringing down those uncomfortable feelings. So in the clinical trials that have been conducted, not only have many of the respondents noticed this subjective improvement in the way they feel, in terms of decrease in stress and anxiety, and even an elevation of the feeling of happiness. There's also some physiological markers, things that can be sort of scientifically measured, things like blood pressure, resting heart rate variability, and even the amount of cortisol in the body, cortisol being that stress hormone. So this evidence supports the sensation of improvement in the people that have undergone these tests. So I'm going to explain in a moment how to do this. It sounds a little strange, it looks a little strange, but why not give it a go? Let's get curious. If we're looking for change in our lives, then we need to do something different. If we always do the things we've always done, then we're always going to get the things we've always had. So let's get curious and let's have some fun with this and see what it can do for you. Okay, let's get into this. I'm going to begin by showing you the tapping points. So the first point is the eyebrow. I'm going to take my glasses off to show you this properly. So basically, following the eyebrow down towards the bridge of the nose, you're tapping with two fingers just where the eyebrow joins the bridge of the nose. So that's the first point, the eyebrow. The next point is the side of the eye, which basically is the eye socket. The side of the eye socket, you can feel that bony bit there. And then we've got under eye, which again is following the eye socket down and just feeling that bony bit under the eye. And the tissues here are quite sensitive, so probably best not to tap too firmly here. And we're tapping about at least 7 times, maybe 10 or 12 times. The next point is under the nose, which is between the nose and the upper lip. So we're just tapping there, perhaps a bit more firmly. So we've got the eyebrow, side of eye, under nose, and then we have the chin, which is between the mouth and the chin. And notice we're progressively working downwards, so it makes it easy to remember. The next point is known as the collarbone, and it's not the collarbone itself, but it's that fleshy bit underneath. So I'd recommend that you use perhaps all 3 or 4 fingers and then tap that fleshy bit, moving along from side to side, tapping as you go to make sure that you cover the right spot. So that's the collarbone. And then we have the underarm, which of course is under the arm. For men it's about nipple height, for ladies where the bra strap would go typically. Again, tapping quite firmly, at least 7 times, maybe more, 10 or 12, doesn't matter too much. And then we finish the sequence by moving upwards to the crown of the head and tapping around just to make sure we're covering and getting that right area, using the top end of all of the fingers, tapping quite firmly. And that's a great one for reducing anxiety. So those are the tapping points. Now, before we start the process, it's important that we get some kind of measurement of how anxious we feel, so that we can then do the same thing at the end, and we can then gauge just what sort of improvement we've made. And to do this, we use something called a SUD scale. where SUDS, the letter SUD, stands for subjective unit of distress. And this is simply a case of putting a marker against how we feel. So it's an 11-point scale from 0 through to 10, where number 10 is essentially, we're saying if we're at a 10, then we're completely distressed. We're actually kind of out of our mind with panic and worry. 0, of course, at the opposite end of the scale, is simply feeling comfortable, calm, neutral. So I would expect typically, we're going to be somewhere in between. And, unless we're sort of facing some immediate threat, then if it's a matter of something that's quite anxious and causing us some distress, then maybe it's a 7 or an 8, or it's a subjective thing, it's personal. So, and it doesn't matter what the score is, don't get too hung up about exactly what the number is. It's a comparative scale, so we can determine how we feel at the beginning and then how we feel at the end. So assess yourself, give yourself a number out of 10 and just make a mental note of that. Okay, let's talk about the setup. Now, there's a number of different elements to the setup. First of all, there's one other tapping point, and this is called the karate chop point. It's simply the side of the hand, that fleshy bit of the hand there. And it could be either hand, either this one or that one. It really doesn't matter. And in fact, it's worth saying now that during the whole sequence, it doesn't matter whether you tap with the dominant hand or the non-dominant hand, and whether you tap on this side or that side, or you can even do both. It really doesn't matter. So with the setup, we're tapping the karate chop point continuously whilst saying out loud an affirmation. Now, this affirmation has two parts to it. The first part incorporates an element of exposure to the negative thing that causes us to feel stressed or anxious in the first place. And we pre-frame it with the words even though, because the second half of the statement is going to be a cognitive acceptance statement. So for example, it might be simply this, and I'll tap as I go. Even though I feel anxious about meeting with my boss tomorrow, I completely and deeply accept myself. And we say that 3 times. Even though I feel anxious about that meeting with my boss tomorrow, I completely and deeply accept myself. Even though I feel anxious about that meeting with my boss tomorrow, I completely and deeply accept myself. And that's it. So essentially we're acknowledging the fact there is a problem. So there's a degree of honesty about it. We're not running away from it. We're not hiding from it or dissociating ourselves from the problem. We're actually exposing ourselves to it mentally. And then at the same time, we're also having this cognitive acceptance statement, like a form of a positive affirmation, accepting ourselves. And also, of course, we're doing the tapping, which sets up the whole process. So that's the setup. And we do that at the beginning of a tapping session. We run that 3 times, as I showed you, and then we start to do the tapping sequence. And during the tapping sequence, which I'll show you next, we can repeat that a number of times with just a single setup statement at the beginning, the one time. Okay, so having measured our subjective unit of distress and got a score for that, having run the setup where we've tapped our karate chop point and saying our affirmation and running that process through 3 times, we're now ready to run the sequence, which is the tapping of the points that we discussed earlier. And this can be repeated a good number of times. So when we're doing this, we're tapping the points maybe 7 times, 10 times, 12 times, and we're keeping in mind that negative situation whilst tapping. And in order to help us to do that, we tend to remind ourselves of the situation by simply verbalizing it, by saying something like that situation with the boss, or that anxiety, or those concerns about meeting with him tomorrow. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, I'm going to take my glasses off again and then begin the sequence. This anxiety, these uncomfortable feelings. I'm feeling so distressed about this. I really don't want to meet with him in the morning. I feel so anxious about it. This anxiety. Yeah, this anxiety. It's making me feel uncomfortable. This anxiety. So that's the sequence. And that sequence, having run the initial setup, can be repeated again and again and again. So we can keep going around. We can change sides. We can use the other hand. We can do both at the same time if we wish. And we can even vary the words that we say to remind ourselves. But it's important that we do think about that negative situation, because we're trying to change the way the brain processes the way we respond to that thought. And by tapping and thinking about the situation at the same time, we're obviously disturbing the brain in some way, creating some curiosity perhaps, and in ways in which we don't fully understand, as I mentioned earlier. Somehow that thought, that memory, that the way that thought is kind of processed in the brain is kind of being stored differently or recoded in a way that somehow removes some of the emotional charge. And so whilst we still know that we have that meeting with the boss tomorrow, the emotional discomfort is dramatically reduced. And so it's worth just going round again and again and again until such time as you begin to feel better. There's a guy called Robert Smith who has developed EFT, and he now calls it, I think, faster EFT. It's just a variation on the same theme. And he says that you should continue to do this until either the problem has disappeared or you pass out or faint. So you can use your own discretion as to how long you do this for. So I would then think about doing the SUDS scaling again to see if you can detect and measure a comparative reduction in the way that you feel. So to recap, it's the setup statement first of all. Even though I have this anxiety about meeting the boss tomorrow, I completely and deeply accept myself. So we do that, repeat that statement a second and a third time, having of course already taken the SUDS score. There's some deep breathing that you can do before that or after that, and then we get into the sequence. And the sequence is the bit where we're tapping the points again, going around reminding us of what the problem is by simply saying this anxiety, or I'm feeling so anxious. And we can just keep going round and round. I missed that one. Keep doing that continuously for as long as it takes. And after a short while, you may find, and I expect you to find, that you begin to feel calmer and more relaxed about this. So have a go at that. And then when you do begin to feel better, you can then begin to introduce a more positive statement. So rather than thinking about the negative situation, you can continue to tap in the way that I've shown you, but you can begin to say, I'm feeling less stressed now. I can do this. I can manage my emotions and feel that I can handle the situation. I've done things like this before and I've come through them. I'm strong enough to do that. So that gives you the idea. So you spend a fair bit of time just sort of kind of focusing on the negative situation. And only when you begin to feel better do you introduce the concept of a positive expectation and a positive outcome. And as you're saying that positive affirmation about being able to cope with it and deal with it, you can then begin to picture and visualize the situation turning out in a much more favourable way for you, in the way that you show up and the way that you handle yourself, hold yourself and conduct your behaviour during that meeting with the boss. Of course, I've used the example of a meeting with a boss. Your own example may be in something entirely different, but I hope that gives you an idea and a flavour of what this process is about. And again, at the end, I suggest that you do that SUDS rating so that you can get a comparative level of improvement. And it's not a one-time fix. You can do it, a number of times during the course of a single day. Spend as much time as you can doing it and just play around with it. And it's a powerful technique. We don't fully understand quite how it works, but hey, if it works and we can use it to make ourselves feel better, then why not have a play around with it? I'll leave that with you. I'm Tim Hearn from Woking Hypnosis, and good luck with it, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Take care.